There is only one consciousness which subsides in the waking, dream, and deep sleep states. In sleep, there is no I. The I thought arises on waking, and then the world appears. Where was this I in sleep? Was it there or was it not? It must have been there also, but not in the way you feel now. The present is only the I thought, whereas the sleeping I is the real I. It subsists all through. It is consciousness. If it is known, you will see that it is beyond the thoughts. Welcome to Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. In Talks 42 and onwards, Maharshi answers very deep philosophical questions from the devotees, such as, there is wife, there are children, friends and relatives. We cannot ignore their existence and resign ourselves to divine will. Another question, how to know the real I as distinct from the false I? Can we think without the mind? Talk number 42, September 24, 1936. Mr. Duncan Greenlees, Madanapalli, wrote as follows. One has at times had vivid flashes of a consciousness whose center is outside the normal self and which seems to be inclusive. Without concerning the mind with philosophical concepts, how would Bhagavan advise us to work towards getting, retaining, and extending those flashes? Does abhyasa or practice in such experiences involve retirement? Sri Bhagavan answered, outside? From whom is inside or outside? They can only be so long as there are the subject and the object. For whom are these two again? They both will resolve into the subject only. See who is in the subject. The investigation leads you to pure consciousness beyond the subject. Normal self is the mind. The mind is with limitations, but pure consciousness is beyond limitations and reached by investigation as outlined below. Getting means self is always there. One seeks to destroy the obstacles to the revelation of the self. Retaining, having once gained the self, it will be understood to be here and now. It is never lost. Extending, there is no extending the self, for it is always without contraction or expansion. Retirement, abiding in the self, is solitude, but there is nothing alien to the self. Retirement must be from some one place to another. There is neither the one nor the other apart from the self. All being the self, retirement is impossible and inconsistent. Abhyasa or practice is investigation into the self. March 28, 1935. Talk number 43. Mr. S. Ranganathan, ICS, Collector of Vellore, Mr. S.V. Ramamurthy, ICS, and Mr. Raghavaya, late Diwan of Pudukkottai State, visited the ashramam. Mr. Ranganathan asked, kindly instruct me as to how the mind may be controlled. Maharshi replied, there are two methods. One is to see what the mind is. Then it subsides. The second is to fix your attention on something. Then the mind remains quiet. The questioner repeated the question for further elucidation. The same answer was returned with a little more added. The questioner did not look satisfied. Mr. Raghavaya said, men of the world that we are, we have some kind of grief or another and do not know how to get over it. We pray to God and are still not satisfied. What can we do? Maharshi replied, trust God. Devotee, we surrender, but still there is no help. Maharshi, yes, if you have surrendered, you must be able to abide by the will of the God and not make a grievance of what may not please you. things may turn out differently from what they look apparently. Distress often leads men to faith in God. Devotee. But we are worldly. There is wife, there are children, friends and relatives. We cannot ignore their existence and resign ourselves to divine will without retaining some little of the personality in us. Maharshi. That means you have not surrendered as professed by you. You must only trust God. Mr. Ramamurthy said, Swamiji, I have read Brunton's book, A Search in Secret India, and was much impressed by the last chapter, where he says it's possible to be conscious without thinking. I know that one can think, remaining forgetful of the physical body. Can one think without the mind? Is it possible to gain that consciousness which is beyond thoughts? Maharshi replied, Yes. There is only one consciousness which subsists in the waking, dream and sleep states. In sleep there is no I. The I thought arises on waking and then the world appears. Where was this I in sleep? Was it there or was it not? It must have been there also, but not in the way you feel now. The present is only the I thought, whereas the sleeping I is the real I. It subsists all through. It is consciousness. If it is known, you will see that it is beyond thoughts. Devotee, can we think without the mind? Maharshi replied, Thoughts may be like any other activities, not disturbing to the supreme consciousness. Devotee, can one read others' minds? The master, as usual, told him to find his self before worrying about others. Where are others apart from one's own self? Asked the master. Mr. Raghavaya, how shall we correlate the higher experience with the lower experience, meaning spiritual experience with mundane affairs? Maharshi replied, There is only one experience. What are the worldly experiences but those built up on the false I? Ask the most successful man of the world if he knows his self. He will say no. What can anyone know without knowing the self? All worldly knowledge is built upon such a flimsy foundation. Mr. Ramamurthy said, How to know the real I as distinct from the false I? Maharshi, is there anyone who is not aware of himself? Each one knows, but yet does not know the self. A strange paradox. The master added later, if the enquiry is made whether the mind exists, it will be found that the mind does not exist. This is control of mind. Otherwise, if mind is taken to exist and one seeks to control it, it amounts to mind controlling the mind, just like a thief turning out to be a policeman to catch the thief, that is himself. Mind persists in that way alone, but eludes itself. April 3rd, 1935, Talk 44. Mr. Eknath Rao, an engineer, asked Sri Bhagavan if solitude is necessary for vichara. Maharshi replied, There is solitude everywhere. The individual is solitary always. His business is to find it out within and not seek it outside. Devotee, the workaday world is distracting. Maharshi, do not allow yourself to be distracted. Inquire for whom there is distraction. It will not affect you after a little practice. Devotee, even the attempt is impossible. Maharshi replied, Make it and it will be found not so difficult. Devotee, but the answer does not come from the search inward. Maharshi, the inquirer is the answer and no other answer can come. What comes afresh cannot be true. What always is true. April 6th, 1935. Talk number 45. A visitor asked, The path of realization is difficult. Worldly matters are easy of understanding, whereas this is not. Maharshi replied, Yes, The mind always seeks external knowledge, leaving aside its own inner knowledge. Devotee: a stay of 1 day with Sri Bhagavan is good. A stay of 2 days is better, of 3 days and more, and so on. If it is a continuous stay here, how shall we get on with our mundane work? Maharshi replied, stay here or elsewhere must be understood to be the same and to have the same effect. End of talk 45.